the Judiciary Committee and the Appropriations Committee briefing. Today's date is February 12th, 2026. We're here for a briefing on the foster care system, and this briefing will be conducted with members of the Health and Human Services Subcommittee of Appropriations. So thank you so much, and you may proceed.
Thank you, Vice Chair Davis and Chair Bartlett and Chair Shetty, if she's here, and Vice Chair Jones. Thanks. Thank you for having, and members of the committee, thanks for having us. My name is Mike Powell. I'm the Director of the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. I'm joined by my colleague, Brittany Gay. We are part of the Department of Legislative Services. We work for you. And we're here today to present an evaluation we did of the Social Services Administration, but more specifically around the issue of foster children who were living in hotels. And I'll get right into it. And I didn't do a PowerPoint today. I just want to talk through what is a fairly brief 20-page report that we put together in a very short amount of time with the help of the Department of Human Services. And when we were asked to look at this issue, I struggled for a little while to figure out just what the best approach to doing it was in a way that would be of value to you. And ultimately, I decided that I wanted to know what had happened in a child's life that led to them ending up living in a hotel. And usually in those hotels, they were accompanied by what's called a one-to-one. This is a paid person to supervise a child who's otherwise unaccompanied. And what that experience living in a hotel was like for them, and then after they left a hotel, what that experience was like for them. And so most of my time today, I want to just talk through the experiences of these kids. I do want to start off and say Maryland is not the only state that struggled with this issue of kids living in hotels or kids that are difficult to foster children who are difficult to place. A number of other states have been sued for that practice or practices related to that. And Maryland is not alone in wrestling with this issue. I also want to say generally, so Human Services gave us a list of 45 foster children who had stayed in a hotel at some point this past summer. And we looked at a sample of those 45 because of the limited amount of time we had. But one of the things we can say about that group is that most of them had had a history of abuse or neglect prior to them being in the foster care system. And that most of them had had what I'll call higher level placement in foster care. So there's sort of your standard foster care placement, but there are other things like residential treatment centers or group homes or psychiatric treatment centers. And a number of these kids, either before they were in hotels or after they were in hotels, had had some of those higher level placements. And so with that, I just want to walk through a couple of kids to help you understand like what their experience had been before they were living in a hotel. And I want to point out that in some cases, they're fairly benign experiences. So for example, one of them, this is in chapter 2 of our report, was a teenager who a judge ordered removed from their home because living there was contrary to the best interests of the child. Their siblings were removed as well. Those children together spent one night in a hotel with either a one-to-one or a caseworker. And then the next day they were placed together as a family in a foster home. There's another one where there was a child with special needs to the point that their parent wasn't able to keep them safe. They were removed from that home and lived in a hotel. And I want to be careful to not say placed in a hotel because DHS will reprimand me because hotels are not placements. This child lived in a hotel with actually 2 one-to-ones at all times because of their special needs. There wasn't a placement available for them immediately. Within a few weeks, they were placed in a residential home for people with disabilities. There's also a sort of odd one where a 5-year-old was in what's called fictive foster care. This is with someone who is considered like a family member, but is not technically a family member. They were with them with their 3 siblings. And one sibling, I recall, was close in age. The other two were younger. And the foster parent was in a situation where their lease was expiring and they had another lease at another place, but there was a gap between those two leases. And the local Department of Social Services said, can we get you a hotel? And they said yes. And then they later declined that hotel. And when the caseworker went to do their regular weekly visit, they found out that the foster parent had moved all of those kids into a hotel on their own. For reasons probably related to housing instability, those kids were taken from that foster parent. The 5-year-old and one of their siblings went to one foster home. The younger ones went to a different foster home. Within a short amount of time, the foster parent called DSS and said, we can keep one of these children, but not the other one. So now this child was placed in another foster home without any siblings. That foster parent called DSS and said, we can't keep this child any longer. And that child was placed in a new foster home a couple hours away. For that child, the reasons the foster parents asked for them to be removed were, I think the case notes probably say behavioral reasons. I had 5-year-olds, like there's good behavior, bad behavior, and 5-year-old behavior. And for this child, I would sort of classify their behavior as 5-year-old behavior, or certainly 5-year-old behavior for a kid who had already been through a lot in the 5 years of their life. Then there are also kids that ended up in hotels because they had had a long history of placements that just didn't end successfully. And so I'll walk through 2 of those. There was a 14-year-old that ended up living in a hotel. They had previously been placed in 2 different foster homes, and they had assaulted both of those foster parents and were removed. While they were in the hotel, they assaulted the one-to-ones that stayed there with them and had a number of admissions to psychiatric hospitals. They were later placed in a therapeutic group home. And after a couple of months, that group home called LDSS and said that child needed removed because their violent outbursts made the staff feel unsafe, and they were placed in a residential treatment center. And then the one other one with sort of some complex behavioral health needs I want to talk about was a 16-year-old who had a number of placements and for reasons beyond their control. Their first placement seemed to be going okay. I recall that it was nearby where they lived. I don't recall anything particularly concerning about that stay, but the place where they were called DSS at some point and said, we are closing in a couple of months, and so you're gonna have to find another placement for this child. They later spent parts of a couple of years in placements for inpatient psychiatric treatment, including a number of placements that were out of state. And by out of state, I don't mean Northern Virginia. I mean, you would have to fly there. They were in an out of state treatment center, and that treatment center called the LDSS and said, we have lost our license to operate and all the kids need to be out within 48 hours. That child eventually turned 18, and a judge ordered them to apply for what's called a TABED. It stands for Transition Aged Youth. They got a 7-day trial period in the TABED, but the child was removed at the request of the program for their refusal to engage. And after that, that child became homeless. They occasionally stayed in homeless shelters. They occasionally stayed with people unknown to their caseworker, and sometimes with their former guardian. So I share those stories, and they're in the report, so you understand the reasons that led to a kid living in a hotel. Again, in some of those cases, it was like a fairly benign reason. In some cases, it was because of a long history of kids who had a number of placements, and like they just weren't sustainable. And then I want to talk about what happened to some kids after they left hotels. And so, as you may know, in October, the Secretary Lopez gave a directive to the LDSSs that kids were no longer to be placed in hotels and that kids who were in hotels needed to be out of them within a short amount of time. And we took a look at 7 of the, they might be the 7 last kids to leave hotels, to just understand what had happened to them after they left the hotel. And these are kids that were leaving hotels in like October of this year, and we were looking at them around Thanksgiving time. So it'd only been a few weeks or a month or so elapsed between when they left a hotel and when we did that analysis. I've updated that analysis as of earlier this week, so I have some updates that I can share with you. But I'll point out that of the 7 that we looked at, 3 of them, after having left a hotel and been placed, had to be placed a second time because that first placement hadn't worked out. So in one example, a child was placed in treatment foster care and they ran away after a month and they were later placed in regular foster care. There was another who was placed with fictive kin but ran away after a day. They lived for 2 weeks in a homeless shelter. Their one-to-one stayed at the homeless shelter with them. That's a 14-year-old. They were later placed in a therapeutic group home. And there was another one, a 15-year-old, that when they left the hotel, they spent the night in a psychiatric emergency room. Then they spent almost 2 weeks in their parents' home before they were placed in regular foster care. That's the analysis we had done of a kid who left a hotel in middle of October that we did a month or so later. Since then, that child has been placed in foster care, then placed in an intermediate foster care, and then placed with in what's called respite care, and that was with a relative. So I think I don't even know how to characterize some of the histories of these kids that we've looked at. I did just want to inform the legislature about what we learned as we went through those, so you understand sort of the complex challenges that I think some of these kids face, and the complex challenges that LDSSs and DHS faces in trying to find the appropriate placement for some of these kids. There's only a couple of other things in our, that was chapter 2 of our report. Chapter 3, we looked at the relationship between DHS and the LDSSs, and I think there was some confusion on my part before we did this work about like who works for who and do they really work for them and those sort of things. When you talk to the people at DHS, at the LDSSs, et cetera, they're all very clear. Those LDSSs know that they work for and report to DHS, that they are an arm of DHS. And chapter 3 of our report has a lot of detail about the amount of communication and data sharing and accountability that goes on between DHS and the local departments of social services. And the last thing I want to touch on, which is in chapter 4 of our report, is just that, again, there are some complex behavioral health challenges that not all, but some of these kids have that is part of the reason why they would end up in hotels. And a number of people told us that New Jersey may have a better model for dealing with childhood behavioral health challenges for foster kids or not, than Maryland does. And the best way I can characterize the distinction is that in Maryland, as a child, there are a number of ways you can get into a behavioral health system. You could come through MSDE, you could come through juvenile services, you could come through human services. But whichever door you come through, like that is the room that you end up in. Whereas in New Jersey, you can enter through many of those doors, but you come into a sort of a common room. So come through different doors into the same room, whereas in Maryland, if you come through one of those doors, like that is the singular room that you are in. And I know that's something that stakeholders, advocates, the legislature is considering that sort of New Jersey model and has been for some time. I'm going to wrap up there and happy to take questions. I do want to say, again, we were directed to do this in late October. We had our first meeting with DHS on November 4th. and managed to have a draft of this report by mid-December and publish it before our session started. There's a lot of stuff we didn't do because of the time that we had available to us. But I want to thank Brittany and our team for just that hard work over a number of holidays, and also just acknowledge the sort of extraordinary cooperation we got from the Department of Human Services. We usually get pretty good cooperation from the agencies we work with. They are the only ones that have ever called me to see if I needed anything else. So I do appreciate it. And Madam Chair, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Delegate Woods.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, are there therapeutic levels in the homes? So are there different tiers of therapeutic levels for the children?
There, and I think the department can probably articulate this better than I can. There are definitely different levels of care in the foster care system. There's I think it's literally called regular foster care. It's like a safe home for you to be in. There's something called treatment foster care, where that foster parent has a sort of license to, like, they are able to help in the treatment of whatever challenges that child is facing. Obviously, there are things like residential treatment centers, group homes, the psychiatric care that are different levels of care for kids who need it.
But are there therapeutic, because there's a difference between a treatment and a therapeutic home. So my question is, are there therapeutic levels? In other words, foster parents who are trained to deal with children with varying mental health challenges?
I believe there are, but I'm going to defer respectfully to the department, who I think understands that a lot better than I do. And
then may I, Madam Chair, follow up? The other question with regard to the hotels. So we know that children are placed in hotels because of the shortness of homes, of foster homes. And so I'm curious, as it relates to children who were in hotels with one-to-ones, and when those hotel options were no longer in place, and there's a shortage of homes, how are we balancing that?
Sure. We only looked at a sample of the 45 kids that they gave us. I don't recall in looking through that sample that any of the kids were in hotels because there was not theoretically a bed for them. In some cases, they might have had to wait. There were cases where there was a group home bed available for a child. They didn't want to live there. They didn't want a roommate. They liked staying in their hotel. They liked being with their one-to-one. It did not seem like there was an unavailability of slots that prevented these kids from leaving the hotels.
So then what was the rationale for putting them in a hotel if there were beds available?
So in some cases, what you end up with is an older teenager who you can't force to go to the placement that you think is best for them. Like I said, in one case, the Department of Social Services was very interested in getting a child into a group home. That kid didn't want to go to the group home. And so the hotel sometimes is an alternative to homelessness, incarceration, or some other worse living situation.
And if you don't mind, Madam Chair, my final question. I was really taken aback. It's the first I've heard, and I've been doing this work for many, many years, of a one-to-one staying in a homeless shelter with the foster care youth. Can you please expand on that?
On the one-to-ones?
Yes, sir. No. On a one-to-one, staying in a homeless shelter.
Sure, I don't have much more detail on that, but this is a child, and I can't remember, they ran away from wherever they had been placed and ended up in a homeless shelter, and the Department of Social Services had that one-to-one who had been with them in the hotel continue to stay with them while they stayed in the homeless shelter.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the speed that you went to work to get this information to us today and before session started. You mentioned the word fictive.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is? That's one thing. And then can you also explain the New Jersey model and why you think we might need to look at it? Why is that a better idea potentially? And I can hold the question for the next panelist if you want, if you think they're better suited to answer, but.
I don't mind doing my best. So we have a
Okay.
footnote in the report that explains fictive care, and let me read it so I don't get it wrong.
Okay.
They are people who are considered relatives but are not related by blood or marriage. So it's like Aunt Lisa, or, who's your mom's best friend or
Like a
something like
play on or something like,
that.
what we call play ons.
And in 2024, this body, I believe, changed the definition of kinship generally to include fictive kin. So they are considered family, even though they are not family by blood or by marriage. On the New Jersey model, I do think that DHS can probably speak to it a little bit better than I can. But I will say that in Chapter 4 of our report, where we talk about that model, there are some national sort of performance measures of the success of different departments of human services or places that help kids with behavioral health needs. And New Jersey's scores better than Maryland in, I think, every category that we looked at. And this is, again, something as we talk to people in this business, a number of them said, Maryland should be looking to the New Jersey model. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of the people in this profession that understand it a little bit better than I do.
Thank you.
Okay. I was remiss in not recognizing our colleagues from Appropriations. Thank you for being here. Delegate Jones.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Thank you so much for bringing up the New Jersey model. I've spent some time looking into the New Jersey model. First off, I apologize. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the speed for which you got all of this to us. And I have spent some time on the New Jersey model, so thank you also for asking the question. Is it fair to say that Maryland, you talked about doors for which you walk into, and therefore you are in that room. Is it also fair to say that we are siloed, for anyone else who might not understand the room analogy, we are siloed here in Maryland. So whichever, these silos, we're not having conversations between all of the different authorities. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say both sort of structurally, but also budgetarily, if that's a word. So I believe in New Jersey, when it comes to behavioral health challenges for children, there is a budget for that, whereas in Maryland, that would be a budget that's separated by the different silos.
May I continue? Thank you. But that silo system, and when in looking at the New Jersey system and how high they score and how they are a model for which is over 20 years that their model has been in effect. So this isn't a brand new model. It is, to my understanding, at least 20 years old. Is that correct, right?
Correct.
This enables them to have one almost governing body that then can be responsive, and have the authority to make those quick decisions for which this type of work calls for. Is that true?
I believe that's true. Did you want to? Brittany is the person that wrote that great part of our report, and if you had anything to add?
Yes, Delegate, that is true. And they have also went to a vendor to have like a call center.
That's right.
So there is a one-stop shop for families if you need mobile health crisis support, if you need a therapist, if you're just needing some support in general, you call one number and then they direct you to a host of different services after doing an assessment of what exactly it is you need.
So it is one number for the entire state, and then they have is it true that these mobile response units, for which I think there are approximately 18 through the state, so every region of the state is covered, they have to respond within like less than 2 hours or something to that specific need. Is that true?
Yes.
So their response time is tremendous.
I haven't looked at it directly,
Right.
but supposedly yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for bringing that up, and I'm so glad that we were able to get some of that on the record. I really appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Valentine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for coming in today. I did have a question on the one document, the chart, where it states where Maryland's youth are. Do you have that chart?
I do not. That's not something that we wrote.
Is that another speaker?
I don't know.
I didn't want to ask you a question if it's someone else's.
Yes, it's another.
Okay, I'll defer to the next speaker. Thank you.
All right.
Easiest question so far.
Thank you. Any further questions for this panel? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and we are going to hear from the Office of Legislative Audits next.
How do we get this slides up?
Gentlemen, can you introduce yourselves?
That one.
Welcome to the briefing. Can you state your names for the record?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Brian Tan, and I am your legislative auditor. Thank you for having us. With me on my left is Eddie Rubenstein, who was the director responsible for the Department of Human Services Social Services Administration audit that was dated September 12, 2025. So from a timeline perspective, our report came out before Mike was charged with putting together that study, and I think it was a byproduct, at least in part, of the findings that were in the report. A little bit of a brief introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Eddie to walk through some of the findings. The report that we had 14 findings, including six of the 8 findings from the preceding audit report that were repeated again. And that's significant because it contributed to the report having an unsatisfactory rating in accordance with the rating system established by the Joint Audit Committee. That's significant because in my 30-year history, there has not been another state agency that has had 3 consecutive unsatisfactory audit reports in a row. And it was unprecedented. That's the first thing I'd like to point out. The second thing is, Eddie's going to be highlighting findings 1 through 9 of that report. I think it's important to note that we're not auditing, this audit report that we're presenting on was not an audit of the local departments of social services. It was an audit of the Department of the Social Services Administration and their role in monitoring the activities that have been delegated to those local departments of social services. So finding 1 that Eddie's going to address is a more global finding related to their oversight. And then there are specific findings related to deficiencies, primarily that were handled by the local departments, but the focus is on SSA's relationship and ensuring that those deficiencies, many of which date back 1 or more audit reports, are being addressed. For the most part, the department was agreeable with the findings. There were some disagreements primarily related to the department's belief that they did not have the authority to go and implement the recommendations. We did review the department's response. We do believe that the department has the authority to address the recommendations that were in the audit report, and the department can give you an update on the current status of that. With that, I'll turn it over to Eddie, who will walk you through the findings in the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, again, my name is Eddie Rubenstein, and I was the OLA director responsible for this audit. Slides 2 and 3 give an overview of our report and some of the key findings, and today I'm going to keep it focused on the foster care findings. Finding 1 on slide 4 is that the independent LDSSs are responsible for administering the foster care, adoption, guardianship, and child protective services programs. SSA is responsible for ensuring that the LDSSs perform these functions in accordance with state laws, regulations, and policies. Our audit disclosed that SSA had not established a comprehensive and effective quality assurance program to ensure the LDSSs properly administered these programs. As I'll explain in the next several findings, the lack of oversight resulted in numerous issues impacting the safety and well-being of children participating in SSA programs. Next finding on slide 5, SSA did not have comprehensive procedures to ensure individuals with criminal backgrounds did not interact with children. State laws and regulations require individuals with unsupervised access to children to have criminal background checks and specify crimes that disqualify individuals from providing services. We found that SSA did not ensure that adults convicted of these crimes were not residing at homes approved for the guardianship program. The LDSSs obtained criminal background checks for all adults in the home at the time the home is initially approved for the program. However, SSA did not conduct periodic follow-up to identify any new adults in the home after this initial approval. As I'll talk about in the next finding, we identified 7 individuals on the Maryland Sex Offender Registry who had the same address as a guardianship home. SSA also did not ensure that criminal background checks were obtained for vendors providing one-on-one services to foster children. During fiscal years 23 and 24, there were 14 vendors used to provide care for children in a hotel. We identified 1 vendor employee who was convicted of murder in 1990. At the time of our audit, SSA could not readily determine whether this individual had unsupervised access to the children. SSA also did not ensure that background checks were performed for individuals working or residing at locations housing foster care children. SSA relied on DHS's Office of Licensing and Monitoring to ensure that criminal background checks were completed for all group home employees. OLM's review of a group home in April 2023 did not identify that 1 individual had been convicted of sexual assault of a minor in 2014 and was listed on the sex offender registry. In June 2023, this individual allegedly transported 3 foster children for activity which a LDSS investigation concluded constituted evidence of abuse. SSA could not document any corrective actions it took to ensure that criminal background checks were obtained from these facilities. On a similar note, finding 3 on the next slide is that SSA did not have a periodic process to periodically reconcile the sex offender registry to its records of SSA providers and vendors to identify any sex offenders with potential access to kids. We matched the registry to SSA records and identified 7 individuals with the same address as an approved guardianship home. There were 10 children placed at these homes as of August 2024. For example, 1 individual convicted of sexual misconduct involving a minor had the same address as a home with 4 kids between the ages of 4 and 8. Finding 4 on slide 7 is that SSA did not ensure that data recorded in its Child, Juvenile, and Adult Management System, or CJAMS, which is used to monitor the LDSSs, was accurate and supported. Although SSA periodically attempted to verify the data, it did not ensure that missing or inaccurate documentation was corrected. For example, 1 SSA review performed in December of 2023 determined that there was no support that an initial health exam occurred for 59 foster children. SSA could not document its efforts to correct the deficiencies, and when we tested 10 of these children in September 2024, we found that CJAMS was still inaccurate for 8 of them. Finding 5 on slide 8, SSA did not ensure that the LDSSs provided foster children with required medical and dental exams. As shown in the table, as of May 2024, numerous children had not received the required exams. For example, the 1,600 children who had not received a dental exam within the last 6 months includes 140 children who had never received an exam, and another 278 children whose most recent exam occurred up to 7 years ago. Finding 6, SSA did not ensure that LDSSs placed foster care children in settings authorized by state law. This is very similar to what Mike just spoke about. We identified 280 foster children who were placed in hotels between fiscal years 23 and 24, some for as long as up to 2 years. Although SSA advised that many of these children had special behavioral or medical needs that required a specialized placement, SSA could not document its efforts to identify appropriate placements for the children. The cost associated with these kids totaled $10.4 million, which primarily related to payments to the one-on-one vendors supervising them. Since one-on-one vendors are not licensed providers, SSA lacked assurance that these children received an appropriate level of service, and as previously mentioned, these vendors were not subject to criminal background checks. Finding 7, SSA did not ensure the LDSSs established and maintained required trust accounts for foster children. State law requires a portion of federal benefits received by children 14 and older to be conserved in a trust account and transferred to the child after they exit the state's care. Our test of 10 children disclosed that a trust account was not established for 1 kid, resulting in $20,000 not being conserved. Our test also disclosed that 2 other children's accounts were underfunded by $13,500. Issues with these trust accounts are also routinely noted during DHS's own audits performed by its Office of Inspector General that it performs of the LDSS's. Finding 8 on slide 11, SSA did not investigate and recover overpayments to public foster care providers, guardianship, and adoption subsidy recipients. Overpayments can occur for multiple reasons, including payments that are made for a child no longer in the provider's care. Although SSA generated a CJAMS report of potential overpayments, it did not investigate the transactions to determine if the funds should be or had been recovered. According to CJAMS, potential overpayments in fiscal years 20 through 24 totaled $34.5 million. Finding 9, SSA did not meet federal foster care performance requirements, resulting in the state incurring penalties of $698,000. The federal government conducts periodic reviews known as a CFSR to assess the state's foster care performance outcomes. Maryland's most recent CFSR was conducted in April 2019 and determined that SSA was not in compliance with 7 performance outcomes. SSA was found to still be non-compliant with one of these measures in September 2024, resulting in the aforementioned penalty. Those are the findings in our report that relate to foster care.
I did want to add one last thing that we had in the report, and that is the vacancy rate. Throughout the audit period, the vacancy rate at the Social Service Administration ranged from 12 to 22% and may have contributed to some of the conditions that we noted in the report. The other thing I wanted to point out is this is one audit report focused on Social Services Administration. There are other audit reports that we issue that look at other activities at the local departments of social services, in addition to reports that the department puts out from their own internal auditor that also notes pervasive deficiencies with some of the activities there. And with that, we'll turn it over to the committee. We're more than happy to answer any questions.
All right. Questions? I'm going to start from that end. Delegate McComas.
Since you all have been working very hard and diligently on how the system works, do you feel that if there was one what do I want to say, I guess a catchment area that would get all of the concerns and then be able to say, okay, this goes to this place, this goes to Harford County, this goes to Baltimore County, and you know, because of what the information they get, then they can sort of get an idea of what's available for those different counties for inpatient, outpatient, group home, foster parents. But in other words, that there's sort of control at the top that then can monitor as opposed to kind of the bottom up, which I think is what the system is right now. It's kind of a bottom up thing, isn't it? You know, people call in at different. There's no central calling in and then figuring out this is where they need to go for where they are and what services are needed. In other words, does there need to be centralization?
I think maybe the department could speak on this better, but I think the LDSSs are responsible for kind of the day-to-day, and SSA's role is that oversight. You know, so I think it is centralized from that standpoint. Really what we're identifying is, you know, a lot of instances where a process is lacking or, you know, is not quite as good as it should be to provide or to make sure that oversight is effective.
Well, the other question I have is, is New Jersey's more of a centralized system than, let's say, what we have here in Maryland now?
So that I can't answer. We only looked at SSA.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Stonko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to go to finding 3 specifically. And for the record is the criminal background checks that led to 10 children placed in homes as of August 2024 with registered sex offenders, if I'm understanding it right. What was the, what reasoning was, I mean, that's like item number 1 of what shouldn't happen of all the items that I see in the findings. Did they give any?
Yeah, so as I understand their position, it's that at the time a home is certified for the guardianship program, the LDSS is going out and saying, who are all the adults living in this home? making sure we know who's there and that there are not sex offenders. What we identified were instances where the person moved in after that initial approval. So it could be, I don't know, mom's boyfriend or something moved in, or, and someone comes home from prison. And, they're just when we did the audit, there was no procedure to go back and periodically say, have the circumstances changed?
Okay, and can I just confirm though, from what you just said there, from your understanding, all of the individuals that fell into this scenario were under that framework? None of them were placed initially?
Yeah, at the point in time we identified them, I think was after the initial approval.
Okay, so extremely terrible hold to be missing in a process, so thank you.
I think that was one of the areas of disagreement, and the department will come up and talk about, some of the constraints that they feel current statute has with that, and I think the next presentation will address some of the remedies towards that goal. But, the question is what happens after they cross the threshold, and I think the department will have a response directly towards that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was there any pattern you saw? Are there clear outliers? So this is, I want to make sure I'm clear. This was a review of the responsibilities of the agency at the state level reviewing, but there were implications for the individual jurisdictions, right? And with those individual jurisdictions, were there any outliers that you saw, or was that part of your review at all?
So we didn't specifically compare each LDSS to one another, but what I will say is I think the findings in our report relate to almost every single LDSS. Every LDSS is represented in at least one of the findings. Another finding we're not talking about today, but Child Protective Services, not investigating those allegations timely. Pretty much across the board, every LDSS had some instances where they were not timely.
Was there consistency across the board? Let's use one example, background checks. Were there consistencies across the board about how that was approached? Were there any jurisdictions that did it better than others? Because I want to make sure that not only is are we holding the jurisdictions more accountable, but we're figuring out what best practices are. Did you see any best practices as you were doing this?
I don't know that I could say that we did see any best practices. Specifically about the background checks, that is, in our view, an SSA function to make sure that those are happening. For some programs, there is a requirement that the LDSS perform it, but for things like the one-on-one providers, because they're not considered to be an SSA provider, they're pretty much just like an ordinary vendor. They're not going through that background check necessarily.
Interesting.
I think it's important to clarify the term local department of social service is a geographic term. There are state agencies, and as my predecessor, the one that Mike mentioned before, they're state employees. They ultimately report to SSA, and so the focus or anything, the contents of this report, that's why they're all geared towards the Social Service Administration. So it's their job to make sure that there is that stability across. Doesn't make a difference on your Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, or in Baltimore City. That the policies and the structure should be in place to make sure those kids have the same opportunities regardless of where you are in the state.
And I appreciate that, and that's what we all want. You mentioned that there were 3 audits in a row that have resulted in really poor findings. How far does that date back?
That's 2017.
I think 2017. And so that means the recommendations that you're seeing in this report, we made those recommendations back in 2017 for a significant, I can't say that. At least the previous report for 6 of the findings that are in this report, those recommendations were made 3+ years ago, and then they hadn't been adequately addressed, and they were repeated in this. But some of them go back 2 audits. And so they've been on the table, and we've been making these recommendations for quite a long time. And the unsatisfactory reports, it's not something that we do a lot of. It's a handful that get a report like that. And to have 3 in a row is quite a statement.
when you do those reports, the agency responds back, and I'm sure they responded back and they're going to comment today. But in the previous reports, dating back to 2017, what has the agency's response been? And if you've reviewed them and they haven't addressed them, but what has the agency's response been?
So the agency response to this one was quite detailed and thorough. And I think overall it was really, really positive. And even the disagreements were not just a flagrant disagreement. It was targeted points that, where we'll need to work, or perhaps some clarification legislation may be needed. But each time we have the report, and I don't think there were many disagreements the last time. So it's not a matter of auditing or oversight. I think I presented to the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee, our correspondence with SSA over the past decade is probably far exceeds any correspondence or audit coverage in anywhere else. They've got to be fed up with us. We've audited them because it triggers a lot of different things, the number of findings, the number of repeats. The legislature has put into place a lot of interim homework on both parts, us and the department, to follow up on these recommendations, quarterly status reports, follow-up reviews, JCR language, which is required status reports. All of that has been happening back and forth towards this goal, but yet we still ended up with this report, going back three reports in a row with that same unsatisfactory rating.
So having said that, is there any thought about the challenges that these agencies are facing from your perspective, having seen this over all of these years, and any recommendations? Because it doesn't seem like things are changing.
So I think the vacancy rate is something that really needs to be, I brought that up for a reason. I think you need to have staff in order to correct some of these problems. I think the department's response is, fairly detailed to address each one of these things. And based on their presentation at the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee hearing last year, I think they're going to have some very specific responses to each of these findings. And I think they're going to be able to tell you about some of the progress they've made on some of these findings, which will directly address that. In addition, I think you're going to hear in the next presentation some steps that have been taken on the part of the General Assembly to address some of these issues, which I also think is an incredible step towards resolving some of these longstanding issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Conaway?
Chair, thank you, witnesses, for coming in to testify. To the witness on the far end, did you submit these slides to us that you're reading from?
Yeah. All the slides should have been submitted and emailed out to the members.
Email to you? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Simpson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate you. And thank you very much for coming in here. Thank you for your diligence and doing these reports and doing these audits. I think sometimes folks will end up saying, well, if we just stop doing audits, then everything will get better. And as someone who used to work for social services and then worked for the Citizens Review Board, and how important it is to keep taking the temperature and taking a look, I really appreciate the report and giving us recommendations. And I feel you that, we're talking about if we have these large vacancies, but what are you suggesting? Because this stops where you say, hey, these are all the findings. It doesn't include the recommendations. I do have the report, where it gives the recommendations. Obviously, vacancies is a huge issue, and taking a look at why do we have these vacancies? Why aren't we filling these roles? I know. And is this a lack of technology when it comes to like the criminal background checks, or having, checking that sex offender list, or is it a lack of communication between our judiciary systems? It seems like where are we falling short? How can we fix these issues? And do you know of places that have fixed these issues? And because obviously, if you're putting 280 kids in a hotel, that's either a very large hotel or a couple small hotels. Of course, it's like $10.4 million. Isn't that in essence a group home with a one-on-one each worker and holding them separately?
So I think that was the benefit of Mike Powell's presentation. I think he gave the story about how the kids ended up in the hotel. I think the bigger focus would be on the duration of some of those stays. I think, as Mike was portraying, each one of those kids and the circumstances between the kids that he looked at ending up in the hotels is not a simple story. It's very challenging, and I don't envy being in the position where I would be responsible for addressing those things. But I think the duration, when you had the length that Eddie presented for some of those stays, I think those are some of the things that holistically should have been more closely monitored. And definitely, you have to deal with the circumstance. If the circumstance is that kids are going to have to be in the hotels and they're going to be in a room one-on-one with someone, then we, as the people responsible for those placements, should know who that person is, whether or not they have a criminal background and things like that, and come up with a plan, a long-term plan. So I don't want to steal the department's thunder. I think they have a lot to say in particular about that. But our report was focusing really, if it was a one-day placement, I don't think you'd be hearing about it today. I think part of the problem was the pervasive long-term stays that we identified in the report. But the department, I think, could definitely address the steps that they've taken since then. In addition, if you look at the department's response to each one of the recommendations, I think they've brought up a plan to go and address some of the things in there. I think they would be better suited to discuss the specific challenges that they had. Technologically, I think the department has had MD Think has rolled out. It was probably one of the single biggest investments that the state has made in technology to go and assist the department. And to the extent they need more to go and do some of these things, that would be for them to answer. I can tell you that what's in the report is really, it comes down to more procedure and monitoring, and that's the pervasive theme if you look through the findings. What are you doing to monitor? Not, Mike pointed out, there's a dialogue, and they were all present, a lot of the local departments were present at the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee hearing. The question is it effective in ensuring that, benchmarks are being made and that there's holistic change to make sure that the long-term findings are being addressed, fixed, and staying fixed. And I think that, that is the challenge. So the department has a lot of resources at their disposal, including an OIG, and they audit the local departments of social services. And a lot of the findings that you're seeing are not surprising to them. They find these things during their audits. So I keep saying it's not an auditing thing, it's a fixing thing that we need to focus about. And quite honestly, they're in the best position to make the decisions on how to best address the audit findings.
And like I said, I appreciate the findings, I do, but we really do need to look at what the recommendations are, because as a government, the whole point of government is to do things cheaper, right, that we can do collectively. And so clearly, if we are just farming that out to other agencies, it's going to have a huge cost if we are just purchasing workers to be one-on-one with folks and relying on outside agencies, because I do believe, my brothers and sisters who work with the Department of Social Services are really doing the best they can. But if there's not enough of them, and clearly a hotel stay for a kid by themselves on a one-on-one, that to me is a red flag alone. Even without the background check, is to have to have some individual staying or monitoring them or whatever it might be. That seems concerning. And it just sounds like we had a very high paid, basically a group home that just so happens to also be a hotel. And that doesn't seem like the most efficient, most cost effective. And I do know that MD Think, because I have my own bills in which our technology is not working as well as we would hope. How are our systems, how are our different agencies who are doing things better helping one another? I think it's the same thing we were talking about with the New Jersey model. It's like, because you're doing things for your juvenile services and your Department of Social Services together, so that we're being more efficient. And I think that just seems to be a bit lacking. We're doing the auditing. When are we doing the fixing?
So again, as I mentioned, we make the recommendations to the agencies. I think one of the to me, a huge change this past session that Vicki Gruber will be presenting shortly is some of the changes that the legislature has taken in response to this. And I don't want to steal her thunder, but I think there are some systemic changes, both by the department, I think that you'll hear in their presentation, and on the part of the legislature to try to target and address some of the specific recommendations and findings in this report.
Yeah, I mean, we do definitely have to make sure that confidentiality is protecting, the families and not necessarily hiding things, that the department are doing. And that I think we can do this much more. I think the findings show we can do this more efficiently and more cost effective.
Okay.
I'd agree.
Thank you. Thank you. Delegate Ruff from Appropriations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll follow up on my colleague, and thankful she started talking about costs, and as a member of Appropriations, kind of want to talk about the potential negative costs that not fixing these problems could have, and your position on those. And so, talking about the finding that criminal background checks have not been done, that references the family law article on mandatory criminal history record checks. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
And that's family law 5-551?
Yes.
And so that's not just related to DHS, but to any facility that has access to children and cares for children are required to meet that statute, correct? Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so the failure to do that opens the state up to potential litigation. Is that correct?
I think that's definitely one of the big concerns.
Right. So I think in these instances that you've pointed out here, fortunately, there was no alleged damage to any child that occurred because of the failure of the department. But if there had been some mishap, some terrible tragedy that had occurred based on this oversight, the department, the state of Maryland, would have been opened up to liability under potentially a negligence theory under state law. Is that correct?
I'm not an attorney, but I could see where some of the findings, if something detrimental will happen, litigation can happen as a result of some of these things. But I can't opine as to whether or not that would be successful in the context of the department's responsibilities.
Understood. We all know anything can happen in litigation. Additionally, luckily, those types of cases there has a limit on the amount of money that somebody could obtain from a negligence case against the state of Maryland. But additionally, based on what you're telling us about the repeated findings in these audits and that it goes back to 2017, there could be liability under federal law and the 14th Amendment and due process based on the special relationship that these children have with the state of Maryland and the department specifically, which could open us up to civil rights violations under federal law, which do not have a cap and could bring back untold verdict or amount of a judgment against the state of Maryland based on a deliberate indifference standard. Would you agree with that?
I don't think I could speak to that. I think that, you could address that to the department. I'm just not familiar with the specific statutes.
Okay. And so I think, would you agree that though the exposure to not only state litigation, which is capped, but also federal litigation, which is completely uncapped and limitless, highlights the significant need to remedy the issues that you have highlighted in your findings?
I think cost is one small factor. I think ultimately what we're dealing with here is lives. We're not dealing with, each one of these is a story, as Mike presented. We're dealing with the most troubled youths in the state. So, cost obviously is significant, and that's why we talk about the response time to this and going 3 audits in a row and oversight. Money's important, obviously. The state can't afford to have any of the litigation that you just referenced, I think. But more importantly, every day that goes by is a day that one of these children may not be getting the services that they need. And that's really, I'm not here. We do have specific losses that we identified as a result of some of the findings. But, to put a price tag on what the impact would be, I think, would just be looking at one aspect of the potential impact of the findings in the report.
And I absolutely agree with you on that. We're dealing with people's lives here, and we're also dealing with a budget, and that's why we're here, that everyone in the state of Maryland pours into, which would then be subject to the potential exposure that's created here. So I think we've done a good job of highlighting the human aspect of this and the fact that we're dealing with vulnerable children who need to be protected at every turn, and that every duty to them needs to be met with competence, but also that the taxpayers' dollars have to be respected by meeting the recommendations of the resources, the resource that you provide. And I'm trying to put a point on how important it is that the remedies are achieved on both sides, the human aspect as well as the budgetary aspect.
I wrote the report, I wrote the recommendations, so you have my support for the importance of the findings. I don't put things in there that I don't think are significant, but yeah, I would compliment it. And I think the JCR language, withholding funds until some of these things are corrected, is a step that the legislature has done to acknowledge that, yes, there's a financial impact in addition to obviously the physical impact on the recommendations in this report.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could everyone just do me a really huge favor? Just look at your cell phone right now, and if it's on, could you please just turn it off? And just mute it. It will be great. Thank you, everyone. And we'll hear from Delegate Jones, also from Appropriations.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Just a quick question. I'm just going to dovetail right after my colleague from Appropriations. You have here, and I just want to make sure that we say this out loud, $25.6 million were potentially lost in federal funding. Isn't that correct on page 3, right? SSA didn't maximize its federal fund recovery?
Correct.
Okay, that's okay. And then as I went through this report, I was just wondering, is some of the cost here covering private tutors? Were these children, I'm looking for whether these kids were able to continue going to schools, especially when they were moved to different probably districts or whatever. Is some of the costs here for private tutors, or where's the school aspect here?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm following the question. Which cost?
It's actually not a page. I'm curious if some of the money that you said is paid for by putting in this report by looking after the kids, is that also encompassing one-on-one tutoring because these children should be in school?
I'm not sure. I would defer that to the department.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony from the Department of Legislative Services.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move to the Department of Social Services Administration.
Madam Chair, Vicki Gruber with the Department of Legislative Services.
Okay.
Yeah, we just wanted to briefly follow up.
Sure.
This is my 28th session working for the legislature in different capacities, and my 8th year as Executive Director of the Department of Legislative Services. When I first came back to my current role with Legislative Services, one of the things that I saw was your need and desire for additional information and accountability. So my first year back at the department, we created the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability, and you heard from Mike Powell, who is the head of that office. And just this past year, I appointed Ken Weaver, who will talk to you as soon as I'm finished. He spent a number of years with the department as a budget analyst, and then his last several years with the department as a committee counsel to the Appropriations Committee. And one of the things that I did see in working with the members of the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee was, what is that next step? Where are the recommendations from DLS that can help us get the accountability that we want in response to these audits? So we put together a set of potential recommendations and potential legislation, most of which has been introduced by the House Chair of Joint Audit and Evaluation, Delegate Solomon. Things like, and Ken will talk about some of the initiatives regarding specifically this audit, but also things like codifying. There is an audit and fiscal compliance unit in the Department of Budget and Management, and one of our potential recommendations was to codify that unit and to have that unit hold agencies accountable to responding to the recommendations and fixing them, and maybe even possibly having a dashboard that all of you and members of the public could look at and say, what is the status of these recommendations getting fixed? Are they not fixed? Are they in progress? Are they resolved? And I believe Delegate Solomon has introduced that legislation. You know, at DLS, we just throw things up against the wall for all of you. You decide what sticks. We understand that. With that, I'll turn it over to Ken. But what I will say is one of the things he's going to talk about potentially could have a cost. And what he's going to speak to is the idea of centralizing criminal background checks, having a central authority for criminal background checks that every entity, and we looked at it, there are over 413 instances in state law where a criminal background check is required. That's not to mention regulations or established policies of both state and local governments, local school systems, universities. Might not be in law or regulation, but it might be in their policy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken. And the only other thing I would say is there are sometimes costs to fixing these things. There's personnel needed, there's information technology needed, but for all the years that I've worked for the legislatures, I've also seen there is a human cost to not fixing them. So with that, I will turn it over to Ken Weaver. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. And good afternoon to Chair Bartlett, Vice Chair Davis. I see Chair Shetty, and I saw Vice Chair Jones and some of my old friends from Approbes. Good to see you all today. My name is Ken Weaver. I'm Legislative Liaison between the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee and DLS. In consulting with OLA to determine what we can do, as Vicki said, to figure out some options here legislatively. So the first thing that I want to do is go a little bit back into the audit. So just to recap really quickly here, in terms of proposed legislation that Vicki had mentioned, this is primarily going to deal with findings 2, 3, and 6 that were in the audit. And these issues dealt with criminal background checks. They dealt with comprehensive procedures that were not specifically in place. We talked about the Maryland Sex Offender Registry. And then also issues in terms of the one-to-one or one-on-one service providers too. So this legislation would address many, if not all, of these issues. So the first thing I'd like to say is that, reading from the top here with finding number 2, with no comprehensive procedures for checks. To address this new legislation will do something completely different that we have not had in the state. And for the first time, this would create a unit, a dedicated unit within state police that would be able to efficiently process background checks and also build out an overall process, like I believe Delegate Phillips might have mentioned, about building out best practices for agencies moving forward. This would be a long-term effort. Another component of that you can see in, I'm sorry, I didn't click the slide over. So another component that you can see, I just went over that first bullet point on the top. The second one, this would be instant FBI wrap-back alerts. Now, what wrap-back is that stands for Record of Arrest and Prosecution. The FBI has this, many states use it, certain agencies in Maryland do use it, but we do not yet have a comprehensive system to ensure that all background checks not only flow through CJIS as normal, but they get wrap back alerts of instant future criminal activity. That has not been done yet. Now, one of the things that affects SSA here is that they're required to do periodic checks on different people, as we heard about. Rather than having them do periodic checks, which are not fully comprehensive and can miss things, this would be a situation where the alerts come in instantly from the FBI. So this would actually reduce the workload of agencies like SSA in these cases. We also talked about, Delegate Ruff talked about costs as well. In terms of the cost of something like this, it's absolutely free. So this is a really important asset that the state has at its fingertips that we have not yet fully been able to efficiently capture and take advantage of. So that's one thing that this legislation will accomplish. And then in the middle of the page with the sex offender registry and being able to basically match that with SSA's current records, again, that's additional workload because the agency, the local departments of social services at SSA, they have to basically integrate their data. They have to figure all this out and report these things in one place. The advantage of a new central unit is that you would have all of these records in one place, in the spot of origin, where all of these background checks are being conducted. And then finding number 6 down towards the bottom, in terms of the hotel one-on-one care providers. Under this law, all of these providers would be checked. So I'll move to the next slide, but before I do, one thing to keep in mind here is when we talk about these one-on-one care providers, there will be an annual process where state police will be able to work with all of our state agencies at the end of every year. They'll hand in a direct list of the positions they have. They'll hand in another list of all of the positions that they feel are going to need background checks. That way the state will be able to determine if there's a new classification of employee, for example, one-on-one providers, they would say that we could close those gaps. So in terms of this slide, centralization and data analysis, just going back through the steps, when background checks come in, there would be no hiring or contract approval. So this extends to employees, and this extends to vendors, companies, service providers as well. Those background checks would have to be cleared before these organizations would receive a check from the state. Contractor background checks are performed directly, reducing potential fraud. This is an important item because there is a finding in the OLA audit where they were able to determine that a vendor had supplied criminal background check information to SSA, but they defrauded SSA by providing information that was not true. So again, the advantage here is that to have contractor background checks performed directly by the new central unit would take that kind of fraud completely out of the picture. And then following up on that, any individuals or vendors with disqualifying criminal alerts, they would be banned from future state employment. We have also seen situations in the state where certain individuals have been disqualified due to a criminal background check, but only with one agency. They were able to pursue work within another state agency because both sides were not talking to each other. And it's not a situation where both sides would even need to talk to each other. It's a situation where they wouldn't even be looking for that in the first place. So in order to cover that gap, the new unit would be able to basically, as stated in that 4th bullet point, give the state a new ability to collect and study data across agencies and roles. So again, if the agency is unable to pick up on a gap, the new centralized unit would also be scanning the same items and be able to say, hey, we found some holes here, we found some gaps here that need to be addressed. And then finally, in terms of additional positions, I did speak about that before. So if you were talking about volunteer positions, contractors, even subcontractors, there have been issues at all levels dealing with criminal background checks. So all of these would be closed up to ensure that children are checked instantly and are watched over instantly in terms of these background checks. And then moving to the next slide. So the comprehensive criminal records check, that is one particular bill, but there are also some other pieces here that affect SSA and affect other state agencies overall. So in the Senate right now, Senate Bill 858, that's the first one on the slide. This is the Audit and Finance Compliance Unit that Vicki had mentioned. And this would absolutely be another first for the state. For the first time, the state would have a dedicated unit in state law that would be able to assist agencies like SSA with these audit findings. So an example here is that the audit, OLA did a great job in showing that there were issues here with all of these items in this second bullet point. And the agency did respond and said, we are working forward to build things out in terms of the electronic health passport, fixes for CJAMs, better data integration with the locals, issues with medical and dental exams. So in this case, the AFCU, which would be housed in DBM, would be able to deploy a team and work directly with the agencies to apply corrective fixes for anything and everything that is uncovered in these audits. Again, that reduces workload, it reduces costs on the state, and again, this is an overall very long-term team effort, which all of this legislation basically reflects that going forward. The new unit would document these corrective actions and publicly report in what would likely be a website or a dashboard type form online, so that the people of the state would be able to see that for transparency's sake as well, and that those items would be fixed. Another bill, Senate Bill 859, and I should actually mention that all of these bills have been dropped for the House as well, so you will have these on your desk soon. I'm hopeful maybe that the criminal backgrounds check bill might actually go directly through Judiciary. So all of these are coming. And then in terms of Senate Bill 859, state fiscal leadership capacity. This addresses what I think Delegate Jones had mentioned and Delegate Ruff about costs and some of these other issues, federal reimbursements. This would be a new initiative, basically, that would allow new resources to be dedicated to address financial issues at agencies, whether it be contractors hired or whether it be special employees deployed to get to the bottom of these issues, because OLA has determined, not just with SSA, but in other agencies, the SSA amounts were in the tens of millions. In other agencies, we're talking about, as you all know, hundreds of millions of dollars that were not completely reimbursed properly or were not pursued properly. This would be a new way to increase the state's fiscal capacity. So that's yet another bill dealing with these issues. So overall, the three bills that I talked about, they've been drafted to issue several of the key findings in the SSA report. And of course, as I mentioned, across the state, statewide. For the first time, again, criminal background checks will be centralized. It will reduce the potential for fraud, and it would remove offenders from roles where they can interact with children. The FBI rap back alerts that I spoke about, these instant alerts of criminal activity, they will be sent to the agency. And a permanent statewide unit will be authorized in law, this is the FCU, to assist SSA and to assist other agencies in resolving audit findings. That is the catch-all mechanism that would be built here. And again, it would be another long-term system that is there for continuous improvement, continuous best practices to ensure that all audit findings are addressed and permanently fixed. And then when it comes to the additional resources that I talked about for financial issues such as federal funds, eligibility and reimbursements, that's the third bill that I had already talked about. So again, there's a wide range of options here that would help not just SSA, but agencies statewide, and these will be on your desk very, very shortly. And with that, I would close the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Groover, and thank you, Mr. Weaver. Could you provide us with these slides? Because we do not have these.
Okay, they should be at the end of the previous.
The end of the DLS slides?
The OLA,
At the end of the OLA.
Okay. Okay.
Should be, I think, after page 13.
Okay,
Everybody
all
else?
right. Thank you so much.
Yes. And
Thank you, members.
I hope Ken, in his role is helpful to you. These are certainly put forward for your consideration. And if we can help you, again, in any way going forward, as we always hope to do, let us know.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions? Seeing none, we're going to move on now to the Department of Human Services.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, Chair Bartlett, Vice Chair Davis, Chair Shetty, Vice Chair Jones, members of the subcommittees. My name is Webster Yee. I serve as the Chief of Staff for the Maryland Department of Human Services. To my left is my colleague, Dr. Alexandra Studstill, the Executive Director of the Maryland Social Services Administration, one of the three major components of the Department of Human Services. If I may just take a brief moment of personal privilege, it's glad to be back before this committee. When I was a committee staffer in this committee, I distinctly recall this committee having discussions about the SSA audit back when I served. I will tell you that since I started with the department in 2023, I've spent every day along with our leadership team to rebuild the department and to bring before you the work that we are showing today. Progress that is very, very distinct and measurable from the audit period of 2020 through May 2024. I will also note that Dr. Studstill started at the very tail end. In fact, I believe his very first day was at the SSA budget hearing in 2024. So he had exactly 3 months of this audit period. That's not an excuse. That's stating facts. We have spent every day of the past 3 years trying to fix things and to rebuild systems that were profoundly broken for quite some time. Before you, there are 3 hard copy documents for your information, and we're trying to compress our audit response briefing that was held before the Joint Audit Committee back in the fall, as well as briefings to the Senate Finance Committee into one very quick presentation. So my apologies if I talk really quickly. In addition, there are 2 other documents with specific information on our audit responses, as well as information about hospital placements. And again, happy to take any of this as questions at the end or offline or whatever pleases the committees. And then for the members of the appropriations committees, we of course have, I think, 5 more meetings together. So we look forward to that conversation as well. If the safety and well-being of Maryland's kids are our highest priorities. We envision a Maryland where all children are safe from abuse and neglect, thriving in permanent homes and surrounded by loving families. And I'd like to take a moment to frame this up for you. In federal fiscal year 2025, we responded to 17,919 Child Protective Service cases. That is the primary trigger for when we get involved and we know about a child who might be in need of service. In addition, we've served in 2025, almost 11,000 kids through family preservation services, 10,654. I'm going to drill steadily downwards in an upside down pyramid as I talk through these kids. If we do our jobs correctly at the front end, the idea is to preserve families, to stabilize families, and keep kids with their families. That is the guiding principle of everything that we do. As of yesterday, there are 3,775 youth in DHS out-of-home or foster care in Maryland. As of yesterday, and actually going back into the fall, there are no DHS youth, that is to say a youth that is committed by a court to the care of the state in a hotel. And as of yesterday, there are 7 youth in DHS care and custody experiencing a hospital overstay. This is over 65% reduction from January 2025 when there were 20 youth in a hospital overstay. 7 youth, that's 7 too many, no question about it. It is unacceptable to us that any child spends even one night without the warmth and love that only family provides. In addition, as I drill downwards, I'm going to talk about the placement hierarchy. It's a lot of words, and again, we've got hard copies before you. Happy to talk about it in more detail. This also goes to Delegate Valentine's question about, if you will, the spectrum of care. In all instances, a placement decision must align with these planning principles And the basic lodestar that we have is from the U.S. Supreme Court, which is youth are placed in the least restrictive, most family-like setting appropriate to their needs. And before you, you'll see 6 primary categories of care. And again, I'll let you all take a moment to read through it. And then I'll go to this big circle chart to give you an example of where things are. Through the work that this committee did in 2024, when it passed the Kinship Care Act, it has profoundly changed how we're able to have that conversation in Maryland. Prior to the Kinship Care Law in 2024, Maryland's kinship placement, as you can see, about 33% as of yesterday, was closer to 20%. We've sharply increased that by over 330 youth placed in a kinship placement setting in a little bit over a year. That is a tremendous number because between the kids in kinship care and the kids in family homes, that's the vast majority of the kids in care today. Every child that we're able to put in a family home or in a kinship care setting, whether by blood or by choice, means that there's one less child in a hotel, a hospital, a residential treatment center, a group home, or any other of the categories before you. In the 3 previous presentations, they raised the repeat audit findings. And to be very clear, we have in this administration stated, yes, clearly there were mistakes identified prior, there are items that were not corrected, and those are actions that we are taking every day to resolve and correct now. That is trying to do in 3 years, or about 18 months in Dr. Studstill's case, work that has not been done for many, many years. And the area that we've split up the work is, the 3 areas are people, by investing in them, practice, by standardizing the practices and accountabilities across the state, and by policy, implementing and changing policies that close loopholes and protect children. Before, if I may, just take a quick aside, the governance structure of the Department of Human Services and our local departments is thus, it's in law. You have the statewide Department of Human Services with a secretary confirmed by the Senate. Then you have 24 local departments of social services, as well as the Department or the Social Services Administration. Those are parallel organizations. Dr. Studstill serves at the pleasure of the secretary. Each of the 24 local directors serve at the pleasure of both the secretary and concurrent with their local governing authority, whether that is the county commissioners or the county executive of that jurisdictions. Each of these local jurisdictions are good for about 80% of the work that we do collectively as a state, and they are the frontline caseworkers that we work with every day. Let's see if I can. What we found in 2023 was a lack of communication and coordination between providers, hospitals, and those local offices. As the auditors found out, that's repeated across the state. We agree with it. We've taken the steps since 2023 to correct that. It's as simple as making sure that all of the directors have everyone's cell phone numbers. Folks can call anytime. It is more routinized through weekly meetings at the staff levels, at the director and leadership meetings, and with direct one-on-one conversations, as well as every time there is a critical incident report, Dr. Studstill or members of his team and senior leadership are roped in to immediately have those conversations so that we can best support local caseworkers when they are in need. In addition, our providers didn't have any type of communications. Prior to 2023, they didn't have routine meetings, and there wasn't a set upon, if I'm provider A, I can provide XYZ services. If I'm provider B, I can take teenagers 12 to 17 or whatever. We started those conversations, and in addition, we started saying, hey, if you have a contract with the state of Maryland, here are our expectations, that you're able to take a child 24/7. If you've contracted with the state of Maryland to provide 10 beds for whatever services, we expect you to hold up to that. It can't be inconsistent, and it can't be, oh yeah, we heard that Webster is a fire starter or something. Yeah, we don't think we want that kid. That's not an option if you have a contract with the state of Maryland. And we found that there were profoundly different practices between each of our local departments, such that Carroll County and Baltimore County might have different practices, or Carroll County and Frederick County would have very different practices. I mentioned investing in people. Dr. Stetstill and an entirely new SSA leadership team was appointed in 2024 to help centralize our oversight and to promote consistent practices. I'm proud to say that as a whole, the agency was, when I started in January 2023, at a little bit over 15.2% agency-wide for our 6,000 employees. As of yesterday, our statewide agency vacancy rate is 7.16%. With caseworkers, that's been an even more dramatic number. I think you all heard in the prior presentations that the numbers was 15 to 22% vacancy. Just for illustration, we were at 17% in November 22, and it's just over 6% as of yesterday. In addition, probably the most important part is we've increased our overall team experience by nearly 2 years. We've retained the employees that we've had, we've promoted, and we've trained and supported our team members so that as of today, the average team experience is at about 11 and a half years. We've also made a number of very profound practice and policy changes. First, to be very clear, we're conducting 100% background checks. We fully support taking a strong, good, hard look through the bill hearing process at the legislative ideas that were just put forth. We're going to be happy to work with the General Assembly in partnership on ensuring that things that make sense are put into law. But with respect to background checks, we are doing that now. The moment we heard about it from the legislative auditors, we took steps to make that happen, even before the audit report occurred. In addition, with both guardians and for providers. The comment and question from Delegate Stonko about background checks for guardians was as discussed, and I'll just put one additional nuance. We certainly defer to the Judiciary Committee and your policymaking ability, but the equivalent would be currently if I'm a parent of a child and I have a girlfriend that comes in after the fact, currently that girlfriend is not put in through a background check. The same analogy applies here. After we've placed and a court has awarded guardianship of a child to that family, if there's another adult that moves in, that is the legal impediment because we don't necessarily know about that additional adult moving in. Again, happy to work with Mr. Weaver and the legislative proposals that are coming through. We're certainly very excited to see what are the ways that we could do to ensure the safety of all of our kids. And again, these are items that we look forward to having additional conversations with. We've also taken the time to ensure that there are new fiscal controls that have occurred to ensure management review, and we have taken steps to maximize federal reimbursement. And again, those are conversations that we look forward to having further with the appropriations committees. I'm sorry, we're a little bit short on time. And in addition, we are also taking the time to take a look at our policies to say, hey, what can we do better with respect to hotel stays? What can we do better to assist with hospital overstays and reduce them? And then we are taking the steps now through a procurement and a software now that we're implementing this summer to allow for electronic health passports. One of the key parts is, as I mentioned, having conversations with providers and hospitals. And this goes to the hospital overstay portion. Prior to 2023, and even up to now, not every hospital, not every provider are consistent about using the 211 press 4 function to tell us when a youth is in a pediatric hospital overstay status. So in other words, if a youth presents at the emergency room of Anne Arundel Hospital down the street, we might not know about it unless someone tells us. And we've been very consistent in working with the Maryland Hospital Association to get that communication out. And again, we're telling everyone, please, if you know of a youth in a hospital, please call 211 press 4 so we can start that conversation. We can start discharge planning so that we can minimize the time that a youth spends in the hospital. In addition, we've built a statewide tracking tool in our system for all youth in DHS care and custody. And we have we are in the process of conducting weekly meetings statewide to work on those individual cases to figure out how do we work together as a state to get a kid out of a hospital and into the most appropriate care with the least restrictive setting as possible. And then perhaps most importantly, we wanted to thank the appropriation and budget committees for supporting us in our rate reform work. Prior to this, the last meaningful rate reform was prior to 2013. And what that has done was, with the governor and the budget committee's investment in the fiscal year 25 and 26 budgets of over $27 million, we've been able to work with our providers to bring in new contracts. We had a round of new provider contracts in September of 2025. We're bringing in a set of additional new contracts later this spring that drastically increased our capacity. The first round from September increased our child placement agency beds by 92 to almost a little bit over 2,000 beds, by 5%. And the next step is to bring on residential child care providers that will greatly help us as well. I think there was a delegate, and I apologize, I don't remember whom, who had asked about the care and the levels of treatment and prices. The capacity chart that you see before you, as part of our rate reform work, we're standardizing our contracts with all of our providers and breaking them up into buckets of care with standardized rates and service expectations. So with that, we are looking forward into the future. Where are we going in 2026? The most important part is we're continuing building our kinship care and family matters initiatives. Because again, as I stated at the beginning, the more we can keep a family reunified and stabilized and supported, the less we'll have youth going into the out-of-home care system as a whole. The second part is, through the governor's allowance and support, we are continuing our rate reform work, and we look forward to additional budget conversations with the Appropriations Committee on that. And then we are constantly working on how do we improve and iterate on our 2025 practices to better enhance our tracking of youth and better improve our care coordination. And again, we look forward to the conversations with all of the committees and the General Assembly this year on how can we do better. And with that, we're happy to take questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Doctor, you're here just for questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Webb has done an amazing job without me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I see members have questions. Delegate Jones, Vice Chair Jones.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Doctor, thank you for being here with us. Webster, thank you for being here with us. You and I have worked many times, especially long conversations through the pandemic, and I appreciate your work. It's a real shame that the Secretary couldn't be here with us. Here. So I have a few things I'd like to ask. The New Jersey model. I've spent a lot of time on the New Jersey, some time on the New Jersey model. I'm very impressed by their numbers, their response time, how fast within the hour they can have mobile response units out. And it really comes down to breaking down those silos, right, of information or the ability to talk between so many. Has the department looked at the New Jersey model? And it really stems from having one governing body who's responsible and that one place to call. Have you all looked at it? What are your thoughts on it? Willingness to move to a model like that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. What I will say is New Jersey has what's called a system of care, which is the model that you speak of. And about a decade ago, SAMHSA had a grant where states were able to have the system of care model. That grant phased out, and so what New Jersey did was they continued on that work even though they lost federal funding. And the Department of Children and Families became the Youth Behavioral Health Authority. Unlike many jurisdictions, it's the Department of Health. And so they did bring it all together. They have one entity that coordinates the system of care, the community-based care work. It's a model that I am a fan of. Maryland is now my third state that I've done this work. And so Commissioner Christine, who leads New Jersey, she and I have a great relationship. And I do think it's a model worth pursuing. It is a model, though, that took a high investment financially at the state level because there was federal funding that was initially lost to help with some of the planning. And so now, even in their 13 plus years they've been doing it, they're still working on how do they sustain the funding, even though they are tapping into Medicaid funds.
Well, Doctor, isn't it also true that they didn't jump in and start when they first began their model? They didn't start where they are now.
Correct.
Right? So they did start, it's many times it's just about starting something.
Absolutely.
And just getting the ball rolling. So, you know, they didn't have that giant investment that they're right from the get-go. They started small and worked their way up, which we could do as well, right?
Absolutely. Happy to partner and have conversations along with our behavioral health administration partners at MBH.
Chairwoman, I have a few follow-ups, please. Thank you. We talked about, Webster, you mentioned 100% background checks, that you all moved to that. I do wish that that would have been where we started, but do we have 100% background checks in kin care as well? Because my concern is when we move to kin care, that's family and everything's okay, but are we also doing background checks with anyone who would come into that kin care home as well?
Yes, ma'am. So make sure I'm speaking loud. Safety standards were not compromised or substituted just because we went with kinship care. Kinship caregivers are still licensed and they go through an entire process. So they receive background checks. They receive the same safety checks that any traditional foster home would receive.
And I mentioned the mobile crisis program that is able to be dispatched with, again, under 60 minutes in New Jersey. Is DHS prepared to more fully implement its mobile crisis program to help prevent kids from having to be removed in the first place? Sometimes we just need a crisis response team. So to really assist foster parents with those more complex cases while working with local organizations and securing services. Many times maybe we wouldn't have to remove these children, but if we had a crisis response team in the meantime.
So two things. Baltimore City has a contract where they have that service available. So we, as you talk about starting small, we've been monitoring and managing what that could look like. And so it's been working well. Then secondly, with MDH, they just received approval for their 1915I waiver that includes mobile crisis response. And so we've been working and learning through our MDH colleagues how we might be able to tap into that resource as well.
That we could do this statewide.
Yes, ma'am.
Right, because in order to have, you know, services and resources for stabilization, that could be up to 6 weeks, right? And so that would be huge. And again, thank you so much for being here and answering questions. I appreciate that. I do have to, my hope, you know, we've heard for maybe 3 years now that we're fixing it, but then the next year we hear that we're fixing it. I am hopeful that we will not be sitting here next year to hear how we are still working to fix it. Childhood is so short, and of all the children who have been failed over and over again, we cannot fail them as well. So I am committed to working with you and helping in every way that we can. So please call upon me. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Delegate Ruff, and then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I completely echo my colleague's sentiments in closing of her comments. I wanted to start with the statement you made that going back to the 100% background checks. Are you saying by mentioning that you're willing to work with the recommendations that are being made, but are you saying that prior to the audit, your agency had all the resources it needed to conduct 100% background checks?
So, and this is not an excuse, so to what Madam Vice Chair said, the way I'll start is.
Doctor, maybe I can ask it this way.
No,
I'm gonna ask it a different way. Isn't it true that prior to the audit, you had every resource you needed to conduct 100% background checks, yes or no?
No.
Okay. So you agree with the finding of the auditors that you did not have comprehensive procedures to ensure individuals with disqualifying criminal backgrounds, could you please? With disqualifying criminal backgrounds were not in a position to interact with children under his care. You agree with that?
No.
So wait a second. You're saying on one hand, you didn't have everything you needed to do 100% background checks, correct? You just said that.
We don't have statutory authority.
Doctor, the question is, you just stated on the record that you, prior to the audit, did not have the resources available to do 100% background checks. Didn't you just say that?
I did.
Okay, and so you would have to agree with the auditor's findings that you did not have the procedures in place to conduct those checks.
Can I add color to that? Because the statute
Can you answer yes or no first and then add color?
I can't without explaining.
Okay.
The way the audit was done, it looked at cases where guardianship had been closed. Once a judge closes a guardianship, the department loses legal ability to continue running background checks on a home. So what was pulled in the audit was we should have done checks on cases where the judge had already finalized a guardianship. I don't have resources, so the answer to the no was statute does not give us the ability to run a background check when a judge has closed a case to guardianship.
So your objection to the finding and disagreement with the finding is that is holding you accountable for a time frame where you have no responsibility, is what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay.
And Delegate Ruff, if I may, Dr. Studstow raised an important point, which is a court, this has been through a court proceeding, and a court has made a determination that the state no longer has custody of that child. In that case, the child's guardian has the same rights and responsibilities that any other parent does.
Okay, so essentially what DHS is saying is that this audit finding is flawed.
Yes, and we've documented that in writing. It's a philosophic disagreement between us and the legislative auditors. The important part is the moment they raised this issue, we immediately implemented 100% background checks for everything that we had the authority to do. What the legislative auditors are proposing to do, we believe we lack the statutory authority to do, and perhaps more importantly, this would be a very large expansion of the state into the traditional family.
And so it's your testimony that you all were abiding by the Family Law Article 5-551 at all times prior to the audit?
Sir, you're making a very blanket statement and asking me to comment on it. I will say that we implemented 100% background checks the moment we learned about this and implemented after our legislative auditor colleagues raised it. There is no question that we did not do that prior. We made the changes as soon as we could.
Okay. You mentioned the lack of coordination by providers and local agencies. Is it not the department's responsibility to ensure that that is happening?
Yes, and again, prior to 2023, I am not able to speak to that, but when we came in, we saw that there was none of that pretty much. It was virtually non-existent, and we took immediate steps to correct that.
Okay. And you also stated in conjunction with the things that you're doing is talking about the new fiscal controls to maximize federal dollars, correct?
Yes.
And then we also just had this conversation yesterday about the issues with the internal controls that seem to mirror the findings from the audit of a lack of oversight over internal controls with budget processes within DHS. You remember that conversation yesterday, correct?
I do, sir.
Okay. You would agree that to date, there has been no reconciliation of the fiscal year 25 budget for DHS.
Again, Delegate, this is a conversation we had yesterday, and as the department committed to the subcommittee yesterday, we are doing everything we can to get things resolved by the end of February. With respect to your question regarding this audit finding, sir, one of the very first items Secretary Lopez issued in 2023 was what's called a fiscal delegation of authority, which meant that anything over $50,000 in expenditure had to be reviewed by specific individuals. And for amounts over $100,000, the Secretary reserved the right to review that expenditure himself. We provided a copy of that delegation of authority, which has been revised and updated since to our Office of Legislative Audit colleagues. Prior to this delegation of authority, there were very inconsistent practices, including missing signature cards and missing abilities for individuals to approve things.
And whose responsibility was it to ensure that that was being done properly?
Prior to 2023, it appeared that it was the then Finance Office leadership. Virtually everyone in Finance Office leadership has since left state service.
Okay, and then since 2023, whose responsibility has that been? Is that not the Secretary's responsibility?
It is, sir.
And where is the Secretary today?
The Secretary is out due to illness today.
After appearing in front of us yesterday? Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate,
Delegate McCaskill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sitting here literally trying to hold on to my seat. The frustration with the troubled foster care system keeps bringing me to these briefings. And I have sat on Health and Social Services for a few sessions now, and it's beyond frustrating. And so, to me, even though we just had a briefing yesterday with some of you, there seems to be a lack of urgency anywhere, but maybe I'm missing it. The mere fact that our dear Secretary is not here today is an issue for me. So whether he's listening live or you take this back to him, I need you all to know that not only do I take this on a civil note, a personal note, and a fiscal note. We keep hearing the same story over and over again, even though we have had some administrative changes. I don't know where enough is enough. I, for those who don't know, am a child care provider, and I serve foster kids. And there is a disruption to my daycare environment because of the lack of this agency. And so whether or not you look at the New Jersey model, and I'm hoping you are, and whether we phase it in, because I understand that there's a high investment that needs to happen. But on an appropriations level, we need to have that conversation too. So Mr. Secretary, who's not here again, I'm disappointed. But my disappointment may have to move into policy. But do we really need it? Because the agency is lacking to move. I don't know. But there seems to be a lack of urgency, I'll say again. You all have moved into my personal, because every time I have a disruption in my daycare, for the lack of performance of this agency, I personally cannot sleep. So today I sit here again with bags under my eyes, having to have yet another uncomfortable conversation with this agency for lack of sufficiency. So I don't have a question. I just want you to know that I am frustrated. And I'm not just speaking just for me, I'm speaking for many. And so as uncomfortable as I am and as uncomfortable as you all may be, I need this to get back to the agency, Mr. Secretary, who's not here again. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. And we usually officially say, isn't that so, when we don't have a question. Thoughts and prayers. Okay. Delegate Embry.
Thank you. I'm just want to make sure I understand what 100% background checks mean. How do you know if someone new enters the household? Is that an obligation both of the licensed provider or family member and something that your agency is checking? Are there two ways of ascertaining it?
So if the case is open judicially, meaning that the child is in what we would call traditional foster care, kinship placement, or even a pre-adoptive placement, however long that case remains open, the home is licensed. So at time of licensure, there's a checklist. There are things that are required both in COMAR as well as in our policy. And because we get federal funds, there are also federal obligations that are required. So at the time of licensure, if you are licensed on February the 12th, 2026, all of those things must be in place before a license is issued. Upon license being issued, you must recertify every year what we would call a reconsideration. So because that home is still open and licensed, they must have a background check. If I am living in my Uncle Webster's house, he's gonna be my uncle today, and I am 17 and I turn 18 truthfully in May, not the age, but I do turn a new year in May. Even though he may not be reconsidered until February, when I turn 18, I am now required to have a background check because I've reached that age of majority. And so Uncle Webster's worker knows that I live in the home, understands my birthday, and is responsible for ensuring I have an updated background check. And then when it's time for him to be relicensed, if girlfriend has moved into the home as a new household member, girlfriend is then also receiving a background check. What happens once I reach permanency with Uncle Webster through guardianship, and the judge says on December 31st, I am no longer in the state of Maryland's custody, I am officially under guardianship of Uncle Webster. At that point, the department no longer would have an active license with him, so therefore there is no annual reconsideration that would require a background check. And so Webster is responsible now for, as a parent, if you allow someone access into your home, there is a prudent parenting standard that would say, I would ensure my child does not have access to any bad actor. But there is nothing in statute currently as of today. I know there are bills moving through the session, but as of today, there is nothing that says that once a home has been closed and there is no active license or active foster care child in the home, that the department has statutory authority to continue to run background checks once judicial determination has closed.
Okay, and so I do understand that, but for the girlfriend moving into the home during that year before the recertification, is there any obligation for the licensed person to say we have a new family member before the year is up, or the obligation of the worker who's visiting the child to notice that?
Yes.
Okay.
While the case is still open, we have full responsibility that any new household member, so if my next monthly visit is going to be starting March 1st, because I did my visit for the month of February on February 4th. Girlfriend for Uncle Webster moves in on February 14th. When I'm back, Uncle Webster has a responsibility as well by license to notify us that someone new has moved in. But should he not, when I go back for my next monthly visit and I see that there's now a new household member, I have obligation to ensure I run the background checks, do all of the CPS clearances that are required.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Valentine?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you both for being here today. And I did want to go over the question I had with one of the previous panels that I was going to ask, and it's about the chart that you had in front of you.
Yes, sir.
And most of the chart is self-explanatory, but what got my attention was the classification of other. So whenever I see an other, I always try to look at what other means. So I looked at some of the classifications, it said colleges, summer camps, et cetera. But then I came to youth on runaway status, and I just wanted a clarification. Is that youth on runaway status because of past incidents, or are these children that are currently runaways that the department does not know where they are?
A combination. So a runaway is truly, I'm supposed to be in Uncle Webster's home, and I've left that home. For many of our young people, especially at a certain age, they reach out to their worker. They will FaceTime, but they won't tell worker, I'm at my boyfriend's house or my girlfriend's house. So they are known to be well. But then we do have certain young people, and we follow our practice of working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We do have some children that are truly missing, and we do not know where their whereabouts are, and we have not had contact with them. And so in those situations, we work both with NCMEC as well as local law enforcement to file a missing persons report, and then there's constant monitoring of that situation.
Of all the databases, the follow-ups on the missing person, to do everything available to locate them. That's
Yes,
what
sir.
I'm getting at. So the only thing I would say, and I can't speak for my colleagues, but I see, hospital overstay 7, hotel 0. I personally would like to know how many that the department doesn't know where they are. And so if that chart could have that type of a designation in the future so that I know the kids that we are supposed to have care of, that we don't know where they are, I would appreciate that.
Got it. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Simpson, do you still have a question? I can't see your light. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And I think this kind of goes along with some of the things that folks have already been asking, just looking at these numbers and looking at numbers, looking at numbers that we've received before from the department when we ask questions. When the thing that jumps out on me is that at 2024, we have 280 children in hotels, and now suddenly we have none. But as Delegate Valentine pointed out, we've got 156 so that are other. And where did that 280 children suddenly go? There was no act, you just say, oh, we don't have any. Where did they go?
We are not saying that, Delegate Simpson. We have taken the time over the past 2 years to Delegate McCaskill's comment about acting with a sense of urgency. We have acted urgently every single day to improve how we collect data, how do we know about our kids, how do we ensure that kids that might be in harm's way or that might be missing are found and that are placed in a loving and careful environment. And so our data teams have built the systems, made the system improvements, and we have made the practice and policy changes and training to our caseworkers statewide so that everyone puts in information into one computer database and we track that daily. Doctor, sorry?
So you're saying you could run me a report and I could see at the end of the year how many kids you had in a hotel stay and what the cost was, and then now where it is now. So if you have this computer system, you could pull out that data and provide it to every one of us so that we could see, I don't need to know everyone's name. I just want to know, you went from 280 to now you have, and I see here you talk about a lower vacancy rate and you say 17% and then 6%, but you've given me no data about how many that is. So if you've reduced the workforce, then sure, 6% sounds great, right? I mean, so vacancies also have to do with where are they? I mean, I have a bill saying you want 40 some more workers, and I don't want to give you any more workers until I know what we're doing. I mean, if they're not in that hotel and they're not a $10 million, and of course that's my my colleagues and the other, but where's the $10 million going? If you say you went from 280, where we're putting $10 million paying for hotels, that sounds like a savings to us. So where did that go? And I just want, when you're going to give me numbers, I want the full picture. I know you guys know stats. Let's see the full picture. How many kids? Where are they now? Where did they go? You know, you give me a chart and you say, where are they now? I want to know where they were at different points. And I want to know specifically how many staff do you have and where are they? Because, you know, you also know I have a bill that was Delegate Shetty's bill, the chairwoman, that's about recovering some of that funding, right? If you're not asking for, if 1 out of 10 hasn't, and that's just in this test that we haven't, you know, gotten the trust accounts for, and some of them are underfunded. Can we round out these numbers a little better? Help us help you by getting a complete picture. I don't feel like I have a complete picture. Particularly, we go from 280, we go to 0, but I got a chart that says, well, that could be that you just shifted the 280 to 156. So you're the math people. So does that mean I have 40-some, 50-some kids that are still, what happened to them?
So the 280 number, and we did provide clarification to our auditors, and I believe also to the audit committee, those were 280 instances. So if I was in foster care and I went to a hotel 10 different times, those 10 times were counted in that 280. So it wasn't 280 unique children. It was 280 instances over the period of the audit. In our directive.
But wait a minute, we knew from the audit there's kids that were there, so that can't be, because if it's 280 and they were there for a whole year, that's 300. I mean, I don't know great math, but I do know some of them.
Right, it's when you leave. So if I'm in a hotel today, if I leave today and then I go back next week, that's a new instance. If I'm in the hotel for 365 days consecutively, that's one instance. So when you check out and check back in, it's the numbers. But to answer your question, in October, we had 19 youth in a hotel. When we gave the directive, we worked to get those 19 youth out of a hotel.
And where'd they go?
And I don't have that in front of me, but we do have it. Some of them went to traditional foster homes. We were able to get some of them in residential treatment centers. We were able to get, I believe, 3 of them actually were able to go back home to their families because we had the services in place. But all 19 of those youth safely exited the hotel and went to a licensed placement setting. And we can provide that breakdown of the 19 and where they went.
And so how much are we saving on that contract for the one-on-one if we no longer need it?
So until this contract goes to Board of Public Works, as it stands, there are only 2 contracts, and it's for Anne Arundel and Baltimore City. Previously, one-on-ones were allowed to be handled at the local level. They were done for vouchers, they voucher for service weather, and there was no contract. We put out an RFP in 2024, and it has taken a period of time, but on March the 4th, the remaining 22 jurisdictions, the RFP for one-to-one services goes before the Board of Public Works, so that for the first time, we will actually have a statewide contract for one-to-one services, which had not been the case in Maryland ever since we were using them.
And I guess it goes the same thing when it comes to, you know, some of the overpayments. And this comes to us as far as safety. It seems to me that if somebody has children in their care and they're a foster parent, you would think in the invoice process you could make sure that you are making clear who's in the home. I mean, there's got to be something that you can do this not just periodically, but being clear. You're not paying them unless, of course, they have a child and they have to submit an invoice and you're accepting the. I mean, yeah. We just automatically pay them?
Okay. Okay. All right, members, I am going to ask you all to please limit your questions to no more than 2. We still have a bill hearing after this, and we have quite an extensive list of witnesses. With that said, I'm going to move to Delegate Ruff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, I just wanted to get a clarification on something. I was asking about the second finding earlier, and I just wanted to make sure that your response that you disagreed and that you all had not actually failed to have comprehensive procedures in place for criminal background checks. Is that your position as to guardianship homes and one-on-one services vendors and foster care?
Delegate, I think as we indicated both in our written response to the auditors, in our slides today, our comments today, we have implemented 100% background checks with respect to guardians and with respect to providers. Dr. Studstill had the extended conversation with Delegate Embry about the circumstance where background checks are not possible from our viewpoint due to statutory authority. The legislative auditors believe that we do. We respectfully disagree after we've consulted with counsel.
Okay. I mean, again, the key word you said was under certain circumstance, right? So these three categories I just laid out, and which are laid out in the findings, are under different circumstances. You would agree with that, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. So that's two questions. I'm sorry, Delegate. I'm sorry. Delegate,
Madam Chair, may I please just finish this line?
If you can limit it to a half question.
Half question.
Because I said two questions.
Half
So it's a
question.
half
Here we go.
question.
The
Which
half
means
question is
a half
this.
question, let me just explain what I mean by that. That means there's no speech in front of it. It's just literally the question.
Understood. You would agree that one-on-one services vendors does not cover the circumstance that you discussed with Delegate Embry?
Dr. Studstill just answered that question, Delegate Ruff. Prior to the contracts that we're bringing before the Board of Contract Appeals and to the two sets of approved contracts that the Board of Public Works approved in September 2025, there were no contractual arrangements. As part of the new contracts, we are requiring background checks. And so, again, the audit already identified the issue. We acknowledged the issue. We took steps to immediately correct the actions. And with the second round of procurements before the Board of Public Works, we believe that that will then be an item that we can implement as a requirement of the one-to-one providers.
I'm sure that's the belief, but I don't think that complies with the family law article.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we will follow up on some of these things that we're not getting the clear understanding on. And I'm sure you all will be fine with that. The other thing is, I asked the members to be brief. I'm going to ask you all to be as brief as possible as well, just only in the interest of time. A very important issue must be discussed, but we need to move along. Delegate McComas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, okay, hypothetically, let's say it's July 1, okay, and the person says, okay, this is who's in the house, and everybody's get their little background check. So then all of a sudden, the person sees, let's say, the wonderful person, okay, that moves in September 1. The thing is if that's the person that was okay at July 1, the person that owns the foster home or the kinship or whatever, they get involved with somebody else. What if the law said you have to notify anybody that comes into your home that stays, okay, and then there would have to have a background check of that wonderful person that came in September 1. In other words, put the onus on the individual that is getting funds to take care of this child, you know, or whatever the circumstances are, because then if they don't do it, and then there's a check instead of waiting for the next year, you know, of May 1, that heck, that pedophile or that horrible person was there and abused the child, and so then you got another problem. The society has another problem because that person could be, you know, very, very scarred. and also sued so anyway, so what's your thoughts there? If you put the onus on the person that is the caregiver of the home or where the child is?
Yes. Like if it's in the law, we will ensure, we would have to educate caregivers, but if it's in the law.
So there's nothing, so in other words, that's a gap right now in the system.
Hypothetically, if there was something in law that required that notification, we would ensure those individuals were educated on such, and we would have to hold them to that standard in the law.
So we don't have anything right now on the books for that.
There is a policy, yes, that says if someone moves in, you're supposed to tell us. So that's what I said earlier. Oh, she left. To Delegate Emery, I gave, that's the entire walkthrough I gave, that there is supposed to be both.
A policy, does it have any teeth if they don't obey the policy? That they could be subjecting themselves to a criminal charge?
Criminal charge, you're correct. In my policy, it can't hold anyone criminally. I do in the policy, if they don't abide by it, because that's a part of the licensure standards, then we would revoke the license. But by policy, you can't hold someone criminally responsible.
Okay.
I'm sorry, just
So,
one extra
but
question.
no, I think the clarification is there now. So he's saying by policy, no teeth, but there is a criminal law teeth. Okay? So that's my understanding, right? Is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
So we're going to move on and then follow up, please, if you don't mind, with DHS if you have any more questions.
I'm just thinking, put some teeth into some stuff.
Right.
The fear of
I'm with
God.
you. I'm with you. Delegate Conaway.
Witnesses for coming in to testify. Is it correct if this was said, the audit finding was wrong, and that's in reference to the 2023 Maryland foster care system?
There was a particular finding that we noted there was a disagreement based off of legality.
It was said that the audit finding was wrong.
The particular finding, yes. We're not saying the entire audit for 2023 was wrong.
Okay, in reference to this, where are Maryland's youth, the 156? Do you think that it's valid to put people who are in college in the same category with youth as on runway status? See this where it says the other 156, the 4%? You have that listed. You have colleges, summer camps, respite care, and youth on runway status in the same category. Is that?
So you would like, so we, by way of the graph size, if we broke some of it down, you wouldn't be able to see it graphically. So if you would like to see the chart just broken down with the respective numbers.
I disagree with that because you could put arrows pointing to the smaller percentage like you did on hospital overstays and hotels. But I thank you for your response.
Okay, and actually, I would like to see the graph broken down. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Delegate Simmons?
Okay. Thank you, and thank you all for coming out. I apologize, I've been in and out, so I just wanted to ask a question. You talked about the drawdown of the youth from these facilities, and there was some discussion about placement. At any time, our system, do we place youth out of state? And if so, what is that arrangement?
So any youth that is placed out of state, and I can get you the exact number, if I recall, it's under 25. But any youth that is placed out of state, we have to enter into a contractual arrangement with that provider, which requires a level of vetting to ensure that there are no issues with that facility. And then we do monthly, when I say we, the Social Services Administration, from a contract perspective, we do a pre-site inspection and we vet the particular facility. And then after the youth is placed there, we have monthly oversight at the facility in addition to the monthly visits that the caseworker must do with the young people. So when we go out for contracts, we talk to all of the young people that are there. If there are multiple from Maryland, we talk to the staff, and then we do a monitoring report that we provide to the facility leadership.
Sure. Chair, may I ask a follow-up? Sure. All righty, outstanding. So when we look at that distance of, we're here in Maryland, how far are we sending our youth across the United States? What's the furthest distance that you're aware of?
We have young people in Florida. and in Texas. And let me also be clear, and I'm gonna be brief, Madam Chair. Before a child goes out of state, it means every in-state provider has declined them, and they have medical complexity. So for the young people that are in Texas at a particular provider, they not only have a mental health diagnosis, but they also have a medical diagnosis, meaning that they are severely diabetic and it's gone unmanaged, and they have some mental health concerns, and that provider is addressing and working with them. And no provider in the state of Maryland had programming or willingness to provide that level of support.
Thank you.
Delegate Mangione?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I stepped away briefly for a moment earlier, so if this question's been asked, just cut me off and I'll just leave it at that. But just this topic we've known about with the hotels for years. I think that's fair to say. But my question stems around, I mean, I knew this was a very high-profile case, but with the young girl, Kanaya Ward, she was 16 years old with a history of suicide attempts, high-risk behavior, mental health issues. Just how does someone like that, with this issue on the radar of the placement in hotels, end up at a hotel with an individual who had been on, apparently, according to reports, 50 hours worth of shift work with no replacement? How do we allow something like that to happen?
Delegate Mangione, we join you in being heartbroken by the loss of Kanaya Ward. We're happy to provide to you the copy of the investigatory report. We can tell you that we took immediate steps after the fact. After the fact again, we clearly is after the fact. But we've taken steps so that that one-to-one provider is not serving Maryland's youth.
So then just one real quick follow-up, and after the fact, obviously, we're all sympathetic in the fact that it was a tragedy, but after the fact, when we've known about this for years, and you take immediate actions, to me says the immediate actions could have and should have been taken before this, because if the issue stems from I guess the facility in Baltimore City let her out, and very quickly she was with no options. Well, if we were able to do it after the fact, find option or implement something where she's immediately supposed to be placed into a certain facility that can handle her needs, it seems to me that it's a real issue that it wasn't done beforehand with somebody with documented history of mental health and suicidal attempts and so on. So I don't know if you want to just follow along with me here and try to give me some type of reasoning as to why it's so easily to do after the fact, but how somebody with that documented history wasn't addressed and allowed to happen like this.
And again, Delegate, our colleagues have conducted that after-action report. Hindsight is clearly always better. We have taken steps to end placements with that one-to-one provider. And at the end of the day, all we can do is try to correct the mistakes that we've made and do better.
Thank you. I'll check the report. I'm new to the committee. Thank you.
We'll be
Thank
happy
you.
to provide it to you, sir.
And if you could provide it to the whole committee, the investigative report.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to thank you all for being here in lieu of the secretary. I wish him well, but I do wish he will be able to return back to the General Assembly as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
That concludes our briefing. I'm going to let the members stand up, stretch for a moment, and we're going to go right into our bill hearing. Members, we'll start in 5 minutes.